2 minutes past, so I will officially start the meeting and introduce today's speakers. So today we have Joe Islam and Paul Moran, co-founders of Framework Genie, based in Birmingham. Their company specialises in compliance and information governance, helping businesses expand into new markets. Joey has been 30 years of experience leading global projects and software solutions. Joey focuses on delivering stress-free compliance outcomes. He has architected compliance journeys for multiple NHS framework bids, accelerating clients and procurement readiness. And Paul, with over 35 years of experience in change delivery across various sectors. Paul co-founded Framework Genie to address compliance challenges faced by health tech startups and SMEs. He ensures digital health innovation meets regulatory and audit-ready expectations efficiently. Together, Jerry and Paul bring deep NHS procurement experience, compliance strategy, and hands-on delivery. They'll guide you through the evolving landscape of the UK digital tech regulations. Today's meeting is a regulatory overview of innovators. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll also be placing a link to a feedback form for at the end, which would be really much appreciated if you could fill out. But please take the floor, Joey and Paul.
Thanks, Andy. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Regulations and regulatory bodies. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Comply, Sell, Grow. That's the title of what we're doing, and it's an overview of regulations for people in digital health tech, innovating startups and scale-ups. I'm Joey Islam, and I'm a co-founder of Framework Genie.
Yeah, and I'm Paul Moran, also a co-founder of Framework Genie. I guess we're delighted to be with you today, partnering with Health Innovation West Midlands to delve into a topic that's absolutely vital for anyone looking to sell their product, especially into the NHS.
Absolutely, Paul. The world of digital health is incredibly dynamic. We're seeing daily advancements in areas like AI. As always, regulations tend to lag developments, and we can't forget the ever-present need for proactive cybersecurity. Given all of that, it's a lot to keep up with across the entire landscape.
Yeah, it really is, Joey. And we often observe that innovators, particularly in startups and scale-ups, frequently struggle with limited resources, expertise, simply time sometimes. They find it genuinely challenging to understand the intricate network of regulations, the multiple regulators that maintain them, and equally important when selling is having clear business processes and procedures that satisfy the procurement process.
I think that's key, Paul. Yeah, exactly. That sheer level of detail and the frustration and bewilderment that comes in achieving compliance is exactly what motivated the two of us to set up Framework Genie. We hope our vision is quite simple to understand. We help companies comply, hence they can grow and sell their business. Hence they can grow and eventually sell their product.
Okay, so that brings us to our next slide. So I'll bring this one up now, Joey. Yep. Okay. Okay, so
go on, Paul.
Yeah, well, I think it here is the context, I think, just to set some sort of context around what we're talking about today. First is, it's probably worth flagging up, there's something like 325,000 plus health apps across the world. I think north of 200,000 are probably available in the UK too. And I think it's also worth pointing out that something like 80% of apps fail NHS standards. And it's probably just worth letting that statistic sink in and think about the time and effort that founders, directors want to put into their product to find it stalled. So, Joey, do you want to go on to talk about regulation?
Yeah. Regulation itself, I was mentioning, is evolving, particularly now with the acceleration of the use of AI. Ethics is becoming more and more prominent in this, and the stand considers a range of issues, including bias, fairness, privacy, and accountability. As Wes Streeting recently announced, the next stage of the government's digital strategy towards a digital left is the NHS app becoming the doctor in your pocket. So key to getting into the NHS app is interoperability of your product. All this is spread across multiple regulators, which we'll cover later on. One of the key things is in our research we found is that the UK market just this year, is expected to be circa 24 billion. So having given that as a layout, an overview of the context of regulation and where it fits in, let's move on to some more detail about what we do in Framework Genie.
Okay, so thank you, Joey. Can you please tell our audience a bit more about what our vision, mission, and goals mean in practice to our clients?
Thanks. Yes, of course, Paul. We found compliance is a bit like a foreign language. But guess what? We speak it for you. Let's bring our approach, our vision, mission, and goals to life with a practical example. So one of our early clients were founders of a startup we worked with, had a hospital interested in their product. The hospital's procurement department then told them that they needed to evidence their compliance. This was the first time they'd come across acronyms such as DTAC, DSPT, FHIR, etc. They were having sleepless nights due to the worry of losing their first big opportunity. Working with us, we spent a bit of time to understand where they were coming from and what they needed. So we developed a plan, and as importantly, we worked with their procurement function. This is about speaking the different languages to build confidence as we delivered on that plan. And together, the plan, us and our client and procurement, we managed to achieve compliance and get the product into the hospital. So that's a bit of an overview of how we work, what our mission is and our goals. It's mainly to be stress-free. So moving on to the more important stuff, let's go on to the next slide to talk about what the challenges are in health tech regulation.
Okay, thanks, Joey. So, I mean, this brings us to the core of our discussion today, really. It's meeting those challenges, particularly for NHS market entry. And we break this down, as Joey has mentioned, to comply, sell and grow. And I think it's worth expanding on why lifting the compliance burden is so crucial for innovators. And Joey, I don't know if you want to expand on that point.
Yes. Oh, by the way, everyone, we will share these slides with you at the end of the session, so you don't need to frantically write things down. As we mentioned before, compliance is complex, and hence this is why we deliberately made this slide busy. It's an overview of the process, and we'll break down each section as we go through to the rest of our presentation. However, the key things to note is what we found for startups and scale-ups is that limited resource and expertise. Often they find it challenging to understand the intricate nature of regulation, and you may not have adequate measures in place already to protect your sensitive information. And finally, the lack of clear business processes and procedures, particularly how to document them and evidence them, was one of the common things that startups found difficult to generate. So having had that sort of intro into it, let's get into some more of the detail.
Okay, thanks, Joey. Let's get into the next slide then. Okay.
So this slide highlights the four main building blocks of the regulatory landscape in the UK. Paul, can you give us an overview of these blocks for us?
Yeah, we'll go into it in a bit more detail as we go through, but effectively, really, the purpose of each block is digital standards, the first one, which is the overarching standard used by the NHS. And that's compiled with information from NICE and so on. It gives a series of guidelines and standards that should be followed. From that falls out the DTAC, which is simply the NHS assessment process for suppliers for the products. And it effectively is, can you be trusted by the NHS? Is it a trust, can it be used? Is it sensible? Data protection, the other one, basically at its bottom line is, can you keep out the hackers? That's what they're keen to see. And then finally, medical devices. The bottom line again for that, there's a lot to it, but bottom line is it safe to use? Simple as that, really. As I say, we'll expand on these as we go through.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, moving on. So how do you get compliant? And what our process, we've broken it down into four main stages. One, and we break these down every through. One is know your product. Two, understand its impacts and key considerations in regulatory terms. Then define what you need to do. Finally, is to plan and do it. So given that as an overview of the stages of compliance, let's move into stage one.
Okay.
So, Paul, can you take us through what stage one is?
Yeah, stage one really is before you even launch your app or solution, ask yourself some critical questions. For example, if you collect names or contact details, then you hold personal details, or personal data rather. Can your product be used to identify a patient? If so, then you hold confidential and or sensitive data. Does your app share or transfer data? If so, you need to have a clear legal basis for doing this. And are you responsible, for example, of deciding how and why personal data is processed? If so, then you're a data controller.
Oh, well, thanks for telling us about data protection. So moving on to medical device regulation, how do I know if I'm actually developing a medical device, Paul? Is there a short definition?
Yeah, I mean, you could boil it down to, could it be used to make a clinical decision or affect treatment? Broadly speaking, it's then likely to be a medical device. However, there are a lot of nuances within that, which can mean it goes one way or another.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. So finally, what do I need to know if I want to sell into the NHS?
You really want to get through something called DTAC, which is the acronym that's has been thrown around earlier, which is the NHS Digital Technology Assessment Criteria. And again, we'll go through that in a bit more detail shortly.
So if the answer, oh, sorry, Paul, you go.
No, I think you were going to say, Joey, if the answer to any of these is yes, then your product will meet compliance. I think, were you going to say that, Joey?
Yes, I was, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you take us to the next slide then, Joey? I think, where are we?
Yeah.
Okay, let's break this down, I think, here. So I think you can start, Joey, perhaps. Can you make sense with what's involved here?
Sure. So in stage one, we covered the key regulators and the questions we need to ask, whether we need to be impacted or comply to each of the regulators. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail. So under data protection, we have the Information Commissioner's Office. They're the enforcer of the Data Protection Act, which was originally issued back in 2018, and that incorporates the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So the gist of this is, if you have a data breach, then the ICO or the team that you need to tell.
Okay, so what are the consequences of a data breach?
Well, the ICO can fine you up to 4% of turnover, which is up to about £17.5 million. But more likely for startups and scale-ups, the relevant bit here is that all breaches are published on the ICO's website. So it can be easily found, it's public domain, it can be easily found by anyone doing due diligence on your company or your product. So that brings us across now to medical device regulation. In the UK, the MHRA, also known as the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, is responsible for overseeing medical devices, including software as a medical device, which most apps are. It's important to note that the MHRA is still evolving its policies to software and the use of AI in tech. For example, our own University of Birmingham has the Standing Together research team, who are working on standards for data diversity, inclusivity, and generalizability, mouthful, specifically to inform future regulation. The regulation of AI is still evolving as AI itself is evolving. Not only are there national regulators developing policy, there's evidence that some of the NHS trusts, for example, the London Supercluster, have created their own AI framework as a guidance for its members to implement AI into their infrastructure, which encapsulates proof of concepts, ethical reflections, and more. There's no one direction of travel that we've found in AI. However, there are some standards that are slowly coming in. For example, British Standards 30440. There are some tentative explorations to how AI is going to be governed. But having covered some of that, let's get back to the nitty-gritty of MHRA and software. The MHRA have a classification system which is based on the risk of usage by the clinician. We'll cover what that risk means in more detail on the next slide. And then finally, we've got the NHS, and the DTAC. Yeah. Basically, it's the NHS's checklist. Any digital health tool that they or social care health or social care services use has to meet these standards in this checklist. It's about giving, the main gist of it is about giving staff, patients, and the public confidence that your product has efficacy and is safe to use in clinical settings. Then finally, more recently, the NHS has had a big push for net zero. All suppliers will need to answer questions on sustainability. And currently, for contracts above 5 million, they must provide a carbon reduction plan. Big deal. But this will become mandatory for all suppliers by 2027. So having just covered some of that, let's go into the next slide and see how we go about breaking it down.
Okay. So, what now that we've outlined the key areas and the key considerations, let's get practical, I guess. What specific actions do we need to take to meet these requirements? If you're going into data protection, then data protection, for example, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, have a data protection hub for small companies. There's a lot of self-help tools in there. They offer things like a data protection impact assessments, which you'll come across if you've not already. They'll have information around how to set up systems and so on. So very, very useful tools to use. You also have the NHS, where they have the Digital Security Protection Toolkit, the DSPT as it's known. And these help you systematically analyze, identify and minimize the data, protection risks in your product and business, really effectively. That's what they do.
Oh, Paul, so if I go through and use these checklists, will doing so make it easier for me to get cyber essentials?
Absolutely, yeah. You will be, somewhere along the line to do that. I mean, to achieve the minimum standard in cybersecurity and show how you protect your system from hackers, you really do need to consider getting Cyber Essentials certified.
So apart from certification itself, what's the benefit of achieving it?
I guess it's rather like, if you lock your house when you go out, you're probably less likely to be burgled. And it's the same sort of thinking pattern for really having cyber protection and locking your systems, if you like, as far as you're able to help reduce the risk of you being hacked. And Cyber Essentials itself is not terribly that complicated, but there's work to it to get done, and it's a really worthwhile, valuable thing. Highly recommended that people do it if they haven't already.
Okay. And so thank you. So given the likes of we found is that Google, Meta, Uber, amongst others, have been fined for illegally doing it. What about data sharing?
Yeah, well, data sharing, I mean, data sharing and transfer, I mean, you really do need to establish sort of crystal clear policies and procedures for how data will be shared and transferred. I mean, it should be always done in a way that respects the user privacy and compliance with the law. I mean, the most notable example of that would be simply the privacy policies you'll see on a lot of online shopping sites and such like. But there can be more to it, so you need to keep that in mind.
Thank you. So that brings us to the next section, medical device regulation. And it brings us to the MHRA. Having highlighted how we understand an app can be classified as a medical device, the MHRA has 4 classifications from low to high risk. For our purposes today, most health apps, mental health apps or digital health apps, will be categorized as medium risk. And there are 2 classifications, they're class 2A and class 2B. This is also changing, but at the moment is class 2A and 2B. So class 2A, the definition is software that provides information for diagnosis or therapeutic decisions or monitors physiological processes. And one of the things that we came across, and Paul, I think there's an important question, is can a chatbot be a medical device?
Yeah, it can be. There is an example for the Limbic AI chatbot. It screens your answers and its AI recommends talking therapies, and it's the diagnosis of the chat and the ensuing referral aspect which make it a medical device, for example.
Oh, okay. So that's a class 2A. Class 2B is software that monitors vital physiological parameters that could immediately endanger a patient. For example, like a heart rate monitor that's connected to something. So remote patient monitoring apps come under class 2B. One of our clients currently in clinical trials actually has an AI platform that harvests data from wearables to predict and flag the risk of falling of patients to doctors. So each of those have a different regulatory route, and we shall cover that in slightly more detail. And finally, there's class 1. So that's the vast majority of apps and software that we've come across, which is stuff that can be downloaded from an app store and just effectively gives passive data. So a wearable like a Fitbit or a well-being app it uses some information that you give it, and then it provides you some pre-recorded stuff to come back, some lists or some exercise regimes, etc. Class 1 is the easiest thing to get, but isn't necessarily a clinical device. And that's the distinction to make. Something that a clinician will use to make a judgment versus something an individual user uses to do a lifestyle. And finally, that brings us across now to the NHS technical assessment and the glowing thing of DTAC. This is the gateway to the NHS. It's basically a super thorough checklist that the NHS uses to assess products prior to implementation. It's again about trust. The NHS staff and patients must trust your product, otherwise they won't use it. And one of the key things about it is establishing clinical risk. This is the degree your product could potentially harm a patient. Mitigating and evidencing these risks are minimized is the job of a clinical safety officer. So, Paul, can you tell me a bit about being a clinical safety officer, and actually, can I be a clinical safety officer?
Well, you couldn't, Joey, unfortunately, at the moment, as you're not a registered clinician. You do have to be a registered clinician before you can become one. And if you don't have access to one, obviously that's something we do. We have Millie, for example, who is one of our CSOs. But you definitely can't, Joey. Yeah, no, you've got to be a registered clinician. There's certain rules, DC, I won't go into the detail, but it's DCB 129 and various other things which dictate that. Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm an app provider or if I'm a developer and I don't have a clinician on my team, I'll need to get hold of one to help me pass DTAC. Okay. So there's some other stuff around DTAC which is equally important around outside clinical safety. So some examples are: have you carried out independent penetration tests of your software? Has it been load tested to show that you can handle transactions of volume? You need to evidence the interoperability, which in terms of hardware, software, and data contained within it. So we're streeting the interoperability bit here is that if you want to have a doctor in your pocket and you want your app to be part of Doctor in a Pocket through the NHS app itself, interoperability is key. Otherwise, you won't be able to get into the app.
Yeah.
Recently, another example I'd like to bring to life is we spoke about DTAC in general. So recently, we spoke to a doctor from University Hospitals Birmingham, and he developed, he's very excited, he developed a prescription optimizer, which was powered by AI. And because it is effectively a therapeutic product, doing improvements in his prescription, he needed to have evidence that it was safe to use. And the only way he could get that, to get his hospital to buy it, was having the DTAC certification. So having covered that in some detail, let's just break it down and move on to the next slide, which is stage 4, how you go about planning and doing.
Okay, okay, Joey, thanks for that. I guess, do you want to continue with this slide, or you want me to do this?
Sure, okay.
You do that, yeah, okay.
So planning and doing. So both Paul and I are quite 35 years senior project managers and program managers. So this is a bit more up our street, how to plan and do.
Grey hair, yeah.
Yeah, great. All the inputs you need. So having asked yourself, understood where you, the product or your business require to have compliance, how do you actually go about it? So you've gathered all the stuff in stage 1 and stage 2, stage 3. You've understood where you need to comply. For data protection, you get your data protection officer. Use the free tools that we've mentioned. Engage the ICO, register yourself with them, and either you or your DPO can work on your security. For medical devices, you should nominate your compliance officer and determine the classification, and then engage with the MHRA. They have a fairly tortuous and we found rather Byzantine labyrinth approach to how you get Class 2A or Class 2B classifications. And it's been influenced a little bit by the impact of Brexit, in that there's a duplication across the EU and the UK. But ultimately, there is a process to follow. It's just quite complex. For the NHS assessment, you need to engage your clinical safety officer and your tech lead to use the free DSP tool and DPAI tool that we've mentioned before, and determine what you need to do in terms of going through that process. With all this information, you can show how you protect your product, protect your business, and your patients. So that's about planning. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so Joey, what do you need to do this? Timing.
So timing, yeah, timing. So what we've done is in a life cycle of a startup through to scale up. So idea, MVP, validation, acceleration.
High level, yeah.
Yeah, very high level side. So depending on where you're on this stage, it's never too late, but it's always good to start early. So once you've got your idea through your process, that's the point in time where you should incorporate data protection and privacy into your business processes as you develop them, and your system and data design. It's a bit like an architect building good foundations. The DPO, once you find them, your data privacy and cybersecurity process will really help you define the foundational principles of how you build your product. So it's good to get your business Cyber Essentials certified.
Joey, okay, is it something you can get Cyber Essentials certified before you have a product?
Absolutely. The Cyber Essentials is actually on the business, not on the product itself. It's how the business itself protects its data and protects and prevents hackers coming in. So that's all about Cyber Essentials. As you move on to the next stage and you start building your MVP, start thinking about whether your product qualifies as a medical device. At this point, what is its classification going to be? So you appoint your compliance officer. This will inform your regulatory strategy through the MHRA to achieve the CA mark. And finally, you're moving on, develop your product, you're moving into validation, you're looking at market fit. You've got a working prototype. Here, you can start completing your DTAC assessment. You can have it evaluated by your CSO and prove that you're meeting data protection cybersecurity standards for not only for the business, but now as you've generated your product. And as you scale up, you keep an eye on the regulatory landscape. It's constantly evolving, as we've seen through AI. You can stay informed and adapt your processes as needed. So let's go on to the next slide, having that overview of timing and when you do and what you do.
Okay, so costs and business strategy. There is a whole bunch of free resources you can get to out there. We've mentioned some of the ones that you need to read first. I think we've talked about DSPT, we've talked about the ISO information and various other things that is around in terms of the information. But effectively about costs, what you need to do is really look at I think it's avoiding rework. I think designing compliance from the start, if you can, will save you time in the long run. And seek guidance as you're going through. It's often free, but incorporate the principles of effective data security into your infrastructure design, including clinical risk assessments, into your product operations earlier on. So designing the product with clinical safety, for example, in mind is important to understand how it may harm patients and design the product accordingly. That will help you save time in the long run. And seek guidance from organizations. For example, if you're doing AI, there's the NHS AI Lab, and there's various other free resources. Joey's mentioned the BS 30440. Sorry about quoting numbers, but that helps with AI too. It's a useful way to look at AI or assistance for AI. But if you're taking a proactive approach, it's really about just avoiding reworks and just getting on with it and helping you to sell to the clients earlier, basically, I think is really what it's about. So I think, Joe, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on that slide from me?
No, I think it's the headache of rework. It's easier to lay the foundations and understand the principles before you design and spend money on code than having to recode afterwards.
Yeah, and we've seen that quite a bit. I mean, it's never too late ultimately, but it will take you more time and more costs to go back and, for example, go through and make sure that the product has been tested, for example, with clinical safety in mind, and the testing and the test scenarios and the outputs do show that. This is what you'll need to evidence when you're going through the DTAC process, for example.
Okay, so let's get to the end of our. We're getting to the end, towards the end of our presentation. We'll move to a QA. So having covered all that, let's summarize it. It's never too late, but start early. Starting early saves you money in the long run. Know your compliance, understand what regulations and how to meet those compliance criteria, understand what affects you and how to meet them, and finally develop a plan. It's actually very similar to the business plan you need to generate to get investment. It's very similar to the development plan you need to generate to build your product. It's a compliance plan that you need to have in parallel. And I think the really key and important thing is that knowing that you can draw on specialist resource when you need it. So there are lots of free, there's lots of free information, there's lots of free sessions. We as Framework Genie offer clinics and free introductory sessions. You just ask people, call on us, give us a call or send us an email. These touch points, if you draw on specialist resource, really will help you develop your plan. Ultimately, it's a combination of the time, cost, quality triangle. And we found that founders are having a hard enough time gaining the investment and learning the language of how to talk to investors, as well as then it becomes a headache to learn the language of how to talk to compliance and how to talk to procurement as a function. So draw on those resources as you need it. So I think that's just bringing us towards the end of our presentation. We can open up to Q&A. So hopefully you've enjoyed our sessions. These are the people that we've got on our team. And I think it's the point we like to say is just if you get stuck, talk to us, use us as a sounding board. We offer free consultation and our approach is that we're here to help. So that's concluding the end of our formal presentation. If it's okay, we can hand over to Q&As and back to Andy.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Paul, for that. There's a couple of questions that have come into the chat. I believe one or two have been answered, but the first one was obviously CE marking, but that's changed to UKCA. And the other one was they sell a traditional medical device to the NHS, i.e. hardware, but are looking to make the next generation of devices smarter. So may include AI elements, apps, more wireless connectivity, etc. Possibly also patient tracking. How does a connected device such as this sit in MDR as it is both hardware and digital simultaneously?
Oh, so
that's from Andrew Davies. That's from Andrew.
If I can unpack that question, we've got a product that will have a patient tracking, I guess, a wearable, and then the product then harvests that data from the wearable, goes into the product, it processes it, does some form of algorithmic processing with it, and then reports it to a clinician. Is that hi?
Yeah,
is that
Andrew's
you,
got his
Andrew?
hand up, so maybe we just he's on the screen. So
hi guys, thanks for getting to the question. Yeah, probably better just I explain the context. So you're making some assumptions there. What it is essentially a piece of disinfection equipment, which is a medical device, but the next generation we have in mind is something that has a lot more traceability involved with it, which may involve patient data. It's going to be probably monitorable from remotely, so it'll be a networked device that might be connected into some kind of IT system, and therefore might have an app of some description associated with it. We still, there's all sorts of ideas. We haven't fully defined it yet, but this seems to be the time where we ought to be, thinking about our regulatory compliance route and what changes from that being in its first generation a simple piece of hardware where the MDR is very well understood, to a connected device that has a kind of IoT, Internet of Things type element to it, which might then start to bring some of the DTAC and digital regulations, which we really up to this point haven't needed to worry about. Now we have to worry about it, so trying to understand how we might approach that and which particular pieces of what you've been talking about apply to us.
So I think the networking and the app side, the data harvesting, the monitoring, and probably its reporting will all fall under DTAC. So you'll have the information governance side of it, and then if you're hosting data, you'll have policies and procedures as to who can access it and how can help and who can change it. So that'll be all under the DTAC space. If that information then is viewed by a clinician to make a judgment, I think you said it's did I hear correctly, Andrew? Is it disinfection device?
Yeah, so currently our products fall under Rule 15 of the MDR, so they're Class 2A devices, but they're hardware, right? So there's embedded software, but there's nothing that's actually used as part of the user interface, let's call it, right? So now we would give it in the user interface, literally at the moment, just pressing a button and it does the job, you know?
Yeah.
The user interface for the next generation could have a lot more complexity and could be either wholly or partially on an app, you know, so, and then there's going to be more data involved in it, so more data tracking. There might be if we're disinfecting a medical device, there might be that medical device would have been used on a patient, therefore there may be some tracking for that. So all of these things are to be defined, you know, so how do we, you know, there's all sorts of really good ideas that we have now how we can make that very, very simple, and I'm sure we've got the talent to make it compliant. The question is, what should we be doing now to position ourselves so that we don't go down the wrong path and find that we're misclassifying it, or we're missing a piece.
Okay. I get you. I think so. It's used in a clinical environment, in clinical settings, but not necessarily like, for example, it might be theatre equipment. So a doctor would use a surgeon would use the theatre equipment, but the theatre equipment itself is only interacting with the patient because it's disinfecting something that is then used by a patient. So in this aspect, I think you would stay as a Class 2A, and the whole data movement about how the disinfection process operates is then monitored. Because the disinfection process isn't patient related, it's not clinical data, I think you probably would be able to get away with just simply having the cyber side and probably the DSPT, but not necessarily the full DTAC. The information governance and cyber side is simply more about positional and usage data of the instrument and the disinfection process, as opposed to, if I've understood you correctly, as opposed to whether your app, your product would host patient data, which I don't think it does. It just holds instrument data, if I've understood you properly. In that case, I think the cyber side, the information security side, governance side, definitely, I don't think you'd have to go through the clinical safety side. You've probably, because you've got the Class 2A on the MHRA, you've already got the efficacy of the disinfection process. Yeah. So I don't think you need to go down that. In terms of the new stuff, you're augmenting it with more development and more software side to improve the use of the product and the disinfection process and make it more efficient and hence, I guess, cheaper. I don't think you need to have any more on the MHRA side. I think it's more about information governance and how you ensure that the disinfection process, if it's remotely monitored, is actually completed. You know, you validate your disinfection, as opposed to someone going in and pressing a button and they can see that physically happen. It's how you prove your remote monitoring is accurate. I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation, but I think we need to get in a little bit more detail.
I think it's interesting. We maybe talk offline. That could be quite useful.
I think it would help just so we understand it properly. I think.
There was another question which is basically related to regulatory and obviously DTAC and that process, the duration, how long that on average would that process take? That's from
Go on, Paul. Go on.
Well, DTAC, effectively, what's happened, the procurement area within the hospital trust itself will be doing the DTAC process, and that process is driven by how efficient they all are to get things done. It can take quite a long time for the process to work through. We have known it done in as little as 6 weeks, but that is incredibly rare for that to happen. Yeah. And it will just take the time that it takes for the hospital trusts and procurement to sort of work through the process. This is where we come in, if you like, in terms of how we work.
There's a corollary to that, Paul, in that I think it would take the client side, the supplier side, a relative amount of time. So depending on when they've been asked for DTAC, where they are in their sales process, if they've done the upstream, if they've got Cyber Essentials, for example, or if they've looked at some of the checklists that we've mentioned, and they've already started some of that documentation. If they haven't got that documentation, i.e. how does the product operate? How does the company support that product and then support its customers using that product? The SLA process, procurement SLA process. If those things aren't documented, then it could take quite easily a month and a half of fairly intensive work to produce the documentation and the evidence required. And then the bit that Paul's just explained about how the hospital consumes, and then or they trust, or the purchaser consumes that documentation, and there's a fair amount of give and take. The longest bit in that will be the clinical safety side, which will be the hospital provides its own clinical safety officer, which we know a few of, and then you as a supplier will need to provide your own clinical safety officer. And the conversation between the two of them is probably what is the most elastic piece, which is unpredictable, because the hospital will have to say, okay, show me how your business process and your clinical process, your clinical pathway, your patient journey, all those steps you need to have documented, and show how in each step there is you've identified if there's a risk or a hazard, and then how you've mitigated that risk and hazard. Yeah. And then the hospital's safety officer will say, oh yeah, I'm confident you've identified all the steps in the process, all the risks and hazards. I'm happy you've mitigated them. I accept. And that process is the most elastic bit of time as to how quickly things get done. Does that answer the query?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Andy.
Yeah, sorry. I think so. They've also asked to arrange a quick chat, Paul, maybe. So your details will be up in a minute, which is great. The other question, the last one, is we have an online self-management course, Holistic Wellbeing, in a web app that we have completed clinical safety sign-off for with the NHS and DTAC. There is no technical integration, no data transfer. We are now considering using ML and AI to support optimization of people outcomes. If we integrate this, what may this change for us, if anything? And that's from Gabrielle.
If I may just unpack that question to make sure I've understood it correctly, Andy. So it's could you just explain the first half, what the app does?
We have a self-management course, Holistic Wellbeing, in a web app that we have completed clinical safety sign-off for with the NHS and DTAC. There is no technical integration, no data transfer. That's the first part.
Okay. Yeah, we were, if I may, NHS requested
go on, Gabrielle,
us. Sorry, NHS requested us to complete the clinical safety, despite the fact that sort of we're a lifestyle type intervention, which sort of sits a little bit on the outside, but we get licensed by the NHS to deliver it. So that's where it sits. So we've done this at a regional level, so it took a bit longer. There was a lot of clinical safety officers involved. But yeah, so now we're looking at the next step to sort of optimize outcomes for people by integrating AI, which there would still be a human in the middle before the AI, so it wouldn't be direct contact with. But I just sort of sometimes, like you said, AI is evolving so quickly, would that then mean, because we're currently not classed as a medical device, we're sort of sitting outside, would that make any of those changes, just so I can sort of think about it going forward, how much of that we do?
So I think you said I think your name is Gabrielle.
Yes,
right?
Sorry, yes. Gabriella. Hi. Yes, sorry.
Hi. So on that brief bit of data, I think the bit that you need to consider is evidencing the ethics of the AI that you've used. So if it's going, common things are bias. So Western medicine is based on middle-aged white man, as we drugs, therapies, etc. So increasingly, AI is coming into focus as to how it consumes the data, how it's trained, what data sets it's been trained on, and then how does it mitigate any of the inherent bias based on the data set it's been trained on. Now, if we're talking well-being, then I guess it depends on whether it's prescribed or it's simply part of a program that a patient would use, and they interact with the program. So if the AI
signposting from the NHS rather than a referral, it's sort of signposted to a digital tool that can be used, but obviously it's a safe tool for the NHS to use in a way. And the AI would basically support our human facilitators in connecting the dots in the background that they might not often see when they just see the person. So it's a synchronous program, but obviously there's what people might post, the sort of sentiment in what they post and how they post it. And what we know is that people don't have to complete the whole program to get the biggest improvements in well-being. And this is where we're looking at optimizing that, but connecting those dots our human facilitators are unable to see, and suggest sort of a personalized message or a nudging that the facilitator would then pass on and and train. So we would continue this training. I understand the bias, absolutely. We'll be building on the data of about the 16,000 people who've been through it. So again, we work with some academics, but I'm just thinking, does that change in terms of regulation as into a different space?
Because I agree with you, there is a grayness in there. The bit that the grayness is that I'm trying to unpack is if the well-being program, the facilitator that changes the program based on the nudge from the AI, if that well-being program then affects the patient and you're looking for an outcome based on that, and that outcome is effectively an improvement or a change that then is monitored, then there is a grey area which we found really difficult to try and get more data on, which is drifting into a class 2A MHRA medical device. So the well-being at the moment is regarded as a non-clinical intervention because it's not therapeutic. All respect to people who provide well-being, it's just the way the NHS...
Yeah. No, absolutely. We don't class this as therapy, but it is, it's got therapeutic impact, but it's not a therapy.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's why it's not suitable for everybody as well.
Yes.
So we're very clear on that. And would obviously, because the facilities, they're more like health coaches. They don't they don't say go do this. What they are is coaching the person to make a decision for themselves, because it's about empowering the patient to take control of their health. So the responses will be purely based on, I really liked your post about your cat, and this, they are all not providing any type of clinical support or anything. They are health coaching in a way.
Then I think you'd stay reasonably well at the moment. Just based on this brief conversation, you'd be reasonably well on the side of the fence that your current regulatory position doesn't change. The bit that we do know about well-being falls into the mental health sector to an extent. There is an increasing amount of scrutiny and regulation on mental health apps in general, but however, that tends to be on the therapeutic side of it, as opposed to the well-being side. However, this is quite ironic. There's a fair amount of research which is showing the influence of well-being and connection into therapeutics, and the combination of the two. So people are trying to reduce the amount of therapeutics and increase the amount of well-being to achieve an outcome. That bit, as yet, hasn't been touched by regulations. But and I don't know how quickly they'll get to it, but mental health apps are viewed as, and forgive me, I'm not talking about you specifically, as a very easy market entry, because it's around well-being. There aren't as many barriers to entry. There aren't many as hurdles to regulation, which obviously you've come across, and hence are cheaper to produce. So more and more apps are being produced in the well-being space that people are then trying to squeeze into the NHS to be purchased. You've gone through that journey, so there'll be competition. As a result of that, I think there will become more regulatory oversight of this space. At the moment, there isn't any. And so the direct answer to your question is, I don't think there'll be any change for you, but I think the change is coming just due to the amount of people getting involved in this space.
Yeah, thank you. We'll keep an eye out, and obviously, now we know that many clinical safety officers. I'm sure if something comes across their desk, we'll have to comply. Thank you so much. That was extremely helpful. Thank you.
So we're out of time now. If anybody wants to contact, please take a screenshot of Paul and Joey's email address, and please take the time to fill out the feedback form. That'd be much appreciated. I just want to thank Joey and Paul for today and taking us through that. It is complex, and as we've seen from the questions and some of the answers to the questions, it could go into more depth. So please take the opportunity to reach out to Paul and Joey, and thank you both for speaking today.
Thank you, Andy.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care. Thank you.
Bye now.